I just finished the San Jose season preview, and I thought, let's do Vegas next. So I also want to say this should be a permanent jersey of Vegas's. I know there are people who don't like it. I think it's fantastic. It's my favorite of the Vegas jerseys. Keep it. Now the Vegas Golden Knights have been an interesting team in that their first year in the NHL, 109 points. That's a pretty good debut in the NHL. But what's interesting with Vegas is it set the bar so extremely high that if this team doesn't win a Stanley Cup with the core they have, and that core is getting older, fans aren't going to be happy, ownership won't be happy, players probably won't be happy either. So the pressure's on for Vegas, and now they're in a division that's perceived to be easier than other divisions, and yet there are a couple of teams in this division that can give them a hard time, that over the last couple of years have proven they can hang with the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, last year, they were projected out to 99 points over 82 games, which would have been a 6-point improvement from the 93 they put up in 2018-2019. Now, they are a team that has never missed the playoffs. They are a team that's now been to the Final Four twice in the first 3 years of their existence and been to the finals once. Success. It's all been success, and yet it's also been heartache. Now, out of the lineup from last year's team are Stastny, Schmidt, Englund, Cousins, Merrill, and Peary. Now, none of these guys are necessarily going to be too upsetting if you're a Vegas fan right now, because with Stastny out, you got to think, well, Cody Glass probably jumps into that spot, or Stevenson gets that spot. Alex Pietrangelo replaces Schmidt nicely. Adding Alex Pietrangelo, which is the one big addition, of course, for them this year, is the reason why Nate Schmidt's traded out to Vancouver. The one question mark I have, and I'm going to come over to the glass half empty side of this, chemistry. The team that first year labeled themselves as misfits. We're the players that no other team wants, and we're going to prove them wrong. And next year, Seattle is going to be basically saying something very similar or the same thing. We're the guys nobody else wanted. We're going to go out and prove them wrong. And having that chip on your shoulder can help you win games. And I don't know that Vegas has that chip on their shoulder anymore. You look at the struggles they had scoring against Dallas after struggling to score against Vancouver. At times against Chicago, they had struggles with scoring as well. And you have to wonder if they still have that killer instinct they had that first year. That's the one question I have with the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the Hockey News projects them as third in their power rankings overall. The Sports Forecaster had them finishing first in the Pacific. I still have them tagged as first in the West. But there are some numbers that tell you that it might be a bit of an overestimation of Vegas. And maybe I'm guilty of it as well. And we'll see how things go for them this year in a different division with different teams. Now, in terms of players that didn't score enough last year that I think were too low on the scoring, I thought about throwing Marchessault on the board, and I thought, no, that was more during the playoffs than during the regular season. His regular season numbers are about where you'd expect them to be. Cody Glass is going to be expected to make that next step this year. He had 39 games played, 5 goals, 7 assists, 12 points. He has said he's been working out. He's been adding some strength, that he feels good. We'll see how it goes. Chandler Stevenson, 65 games played last year, 11 goals, 15 assists, 26 points. So for Stevenson, coming over from Washington, playing a bigger role in Vegas, I would expect his numbers to go up. And Shea Theodore is now at that next level, and we should see it as a scorer as well. 71 games, 13 goals, 33 assists, 46 points. I think he's going to be a premier defenseman in this league. At some point, he'll probably get a 70-point season out of 82 games, of course, which we'll be back to next year. But I think this year, I think he'll maybe he gets 46 points in 56 games this year. I could see him doing that. The rookie to watch, I went with Peyton Krebs. This is a team that needs an infusion of youth. They do. They need to get some kids into the lineup. And as soon as this year, they could start to really feel that loss of Nick Suzuki, who has been fantastic for Montreal. And yeah, Habs fans will tell you, we wouldn't give him back if they asked. So they need to make sure they're injecting young players into the lineup because, like I said, the veterans get older. It is a young man's league. And eventually all those older players, that'll usually translate to a slower team. And you don't want to get into that. Goals for, and goals against, they were 13th in both. So this is where I think maybe there's an overestimation that happens. They had 3.15 goals per game, 2.94 goals against per game. Being 13th in both tells you they had their struggles this past year. And so they can be red hot. They can also have their issues, and we'll see how things go for them this year. Power play, 21.99%, which was 9th, which is not too shabby. Penalty kill, surprisingly low, 76.64%, which was 27th in the NHL. They have to get that going. As I said, the big add is Pietrangelo. That's your change to this roster. So when I was doing the core six, this is why I like doing the core six. This is where I think it really shows which teams have those good young rosters and which ones are relying more on veterans. So when I weed out the veterans from that core six, I'm talking anybody 29, 30 and older, it really shows you that there's some teams that maybe they do have a bit of a challenge with the younger players. So Carlson's 27. Glass and Tuck are, of course, younger. Theodore and Haig. I put Nick Haig on the list because I think Haig is going to probably come into his own this year. And Leonard is the younger of the two goaltenders. For all of the furrowing of brows with some Vegas fans, I'm saying some, when it comes to Marc-Andre Fleury, Fleury's 36 years of age. He's not going to get younger. It's not how clocks or calendars work. So you're going to have that guy to move on too. And as heartbreaking as it can be to lose that first love, and it really and truly can be, you need to make that move at the right time. I looked at an expansion team that maybe didn't have it all planned out after. You had John Van Beesbroek in Florida, who was fantastic. They go to the Stanley Cup Final in '96. Where have they been since? So at the very least with Vegas, they're being proactive. They picked up Robin Leonard, and they gave him a vote of confidence with a contract extension. Their coach, Peter DeBoer, again, very good coach. I thought for Vegas, helped turn their record around. They were a middling team with Gallant. I like Gallant. Not going to say I don't. But when DeBoer took over, their record got better. And they still got through to the Final Four. They lost to Dallas and very nearly got to a Stanley Cup Final. So DeBoer's a good coach. Kelly McCrimmon's GM. You can have the debate about whether or not George McPhee's the actual GM. There is something to that, I think. Kelly McCrimmon was given that job, I think, in part because they didn't want to lose him to another team. So we'll give you the GM job, and we'll bump up George to president. And we'll see whether or not at some point George McPhee says, I'd like to try GMing somewhere. But again, depending on who you ask, he may still be the guy who's making the final decision anyways and still playing GM. And McCrimmon just gets the bump up in pay, being the general manager. The next big hype, Brendan Brisson, who they pick up in the draft. So I'm talking about their core six. Now they need those young guys in the lineup. Brisson could be a steal for them in this draft. The prospect reports that I was reading, basically he's a boomer bust type. We may look back 5 years down the road and think, well, he didn't make it. But we may look back 5 years down the road and say, that was a fantastic call by the Vegas Golden Knights, and they got a steal at the draft table. This is where we start to see how well their amateur scouting performs, because we know their pro scouting is fantastic. We saw that their first year with the team that they threw together, but we'll see how their pro scouting is, I would think, as soon as this year when we see some of these kids coming into the lineup and how they perform and how kids that other teams drafted maybe behind them perform, and that's where you kind of get an idea. Now, the record month over month, October they were 8-5-1, so they were solid, and then November they stumbled, 5-6-3. Very good in December, 9-4-2. Stumbled in January, 4-5-1, and then in February, 10-2-1 as they kind of started to steamroll. There was actually at one point last year some debate about whether they might end up finishing first, or maybe Edmonton was going to finish first in the division. That 10-2-1 run really kind of put that all to bed. And then March they were 3-2. Very solid March for them. After that February. So 13-4-1 over those final 6 weeks of the season, 6-7 weeks. Now, when you look at their record against their divisional opponents for this year, well, against Anaheim they were 3-1 last year. Arizona they were 2-1. Against Colorado 0-2. It's going to be great to see Vegas and Colorado 8 times. LA they were 1-3 against the Kings. Against Minnesota 1-1. Against San Jose 3-0-1. And against St. Louis, 2-1. So they do enjoy playing against San Jose. We know this. We're aware of this. We'll move along. St. Louis, they handled. Minnesota, okay. The Kings, they struggled against the Kings. It was something that I thought was interesting last year, but their overall record against the teams in their division, 12-9-1. And those are the only 7 teams you need to worry about. So there won't be any Vegas versus Calgary unless they meet in the semifinals before you get to the finals. They won't call it the conference finals this year because there aren't conferences. There's 4 divisions. So I would think they'd go back to calling the semifinals, which is what it was back in the early 80s when I started watching hockey. That's why I still, every now and then, I'll slip and call it the semifinals. But yeah, this team is very good. You've got Marchessault, you've got Smith, you've got Stone, you've got Pietrangelo, you've got all these really good veteran players. But if Vegas has some kind of a stumble this year, if they end up out in the first round, if things don't quite go their way, the very next conversation we would have about Vegas is, okay, so they've got all these veterans, it's not really working out, they're not really at that championship level, now what? And that's the question that the Vegas wants to avoid by winning it this year. They are one of the favorites to win the Stanley Cup this year, and we'll see whether or not they live up to all that hype. Colorado's the favorite. I think it's Colorado, Tampa, and then Vegas, I think, are the top 3 at least. I think that's what it was the last time I looked. I don't gamble, so I stay away from all that. I like keeping my money. So I come from stock that are very bad gamblers. I looked at men in my life and went, wow, men in my family are really bad at gambling, so I stayed as far away from it as possible. I generally don't do it. I do the 50-50 draws through the Canucks, though, because I know that money goes to charity, and those jackpots get pretty high. So, anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below regarding the Vegas Golden Knights and how they may perform this season. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.